In the public sector, compensation is generally through basic pay and allowances. And these allowances really depend from sector to sector. They are classified either remuneration or facilitative, or if you want to call it, reimbursable allowances. And they are paid generally on a monthly basis together with the salary, while facilitative, which are known as reimbursable, they are paid to you to meet the expenses because you are on duty or government duty, and therefore they need to be reimbursed. So rationalizing inadvertent costs through streamlining the payment of allowances, we believe as a commission would then positively impact wage bill sustainability. In 2014, the Salaries and the Remuneration Commission undertook a study which identified 156 allowances. 2019, we ensured we went to IFMIS, we looked at the COB reports, all state corporation reports, and guess what? The allowances had increased to 247. The allowances ratio to wage bill is about 40%. 40%, and of course, remuneration allowance is slightly on the higher side, is about 74%, while the other allowance, which is facilitative, is about 25%. So the share between remunerative and facilitative is around 25 to 75%. What are some of the key issues that we have identified? Is that there is conversion of facilitative allowances to remuneration, and I have attempted to explain how that has happened. There is payment of allowances whose intended purpose has changed. Maybe we used to have what we call allowances like risk allowance, all right? We continue paying because there is a better way we can address risk allowance than giving you cash. We'd rather take a cover, either a risk cover, which is much better off for that individual than continue to pay you 2,000-3,000 shillings for the risks that you are exposed to. We continue seeing that payment of allowance as a percentage of basic salary is also a practice that continues to be experienced. There is commutation or facilitation into cash. We are looking at is developing a policy framework for streamlining the management of allowances in the public sector. The framework doesn't exist. As I mentioned, we had done a study in 2014 giving us 156 allowances. We've come through all the government systems and state corporations to identify how many more allowances are there, but there is now an opportunity to come up with a policy framework that can streamline all the allowances. Secondly, we would like to review and rationalize allowances in the public service so that we can address the issues of how many of these allowances really do we need, how much should be paid for these specific allowances, what is the justification, and of course, eligibility. Number 3 is to strengthen the compliance mechanisms to curb misuse and abuse. Then number 4 is to strengthen collection and storage, strengthening collection and storage of human resource and payroll data through a centralized data repository system for sound decision making on the wage bill management, including allowances. I know nationwide or countrywide or government-wide there is a discussion around establishing a human resource payroll database for human resources to allow the Commission and any other institution that may need information that can help us to have what we call a quick access to information, especially pay information, that is likely to help us make certain decisions that can help us to be able to direct this country to where we need to go.
I thought it was going to be a very interesting paper, and indeed it is. The question to ask is, because the period that coincides with devolution between 2014 to 2019 is when we've seen the largest growth in allowances. This is the same period when SRC was also present. So there are a few questions to ask there. Why does this coincide with the existence of SRC and the same time when devolution has taken root? The paper also has looked at some of the strategies going forward. What are the policy issues and the considerations? And one of them is, since SRC came into the space, they have adopted a policy direction on consolidated pay. And some of the guidance that have been given has been implemented mainly by the new institutions, like all the constitutional commissions and independent offices have implemented this new policy of consolidated pay, which provides that not more than 40% of the pay should be attributable to allowances. In as far as allowances are concerned, the paper should probably have made a comparison, an attempt to look at what is government paying and what is being paid in the private sector, because we're in the same job market, to ensure that employees within the public sector are adequately compensated in sync with what the market offers. Some pay systems within public service, as indicated, are consolidated, while others are segregated. So there's a need for a policy direction to ensure that there's only one system that is adopted across public service. There's also, the paper also identified cases of abuse and non-compliance. I think the non-compliance issue is one that was clearly alluded to by the presenter in terms of complying with the policies that have been put in place. The interesting point is that in Malaysia, the trade unions engage in a collaborative way to look at the salary process. They do not bargain for salaries. They do not engage in determining the salaries, but it's a collaboration between the trade unions vis-a-vis now the employer, who happens to be government. One question that I was asking myself is, should this paper have probably looked at the comparison between the terms of employment, permanent vis-a-vis contractual workforce, and allowances? Is there any relationship? Do we find value when we have permanent staff, permanent and pensionable, vis-a-vis when we have a workforce that is basically on contractual terms? The other question that I wanted to pose was a question on data integrity. While the paper, as I went through it, indicated that the salaries component for counties for last year was 128.6 billion. Other reports, like the Controller of Budget reports, indicate that that salary component was 163 billion shillings. There are a couple of questions that I pose even to my colleagues as they come to respond. One is in terms of the enhancement mechanisms that are required to ensure there's an appropriate policy framework to streamline the management of allowances in public sector. The compliance issues specifically, since we are told that about 48.7% of the compliance was by state corporations. The question is, why didn't the other institutions comply? What is it that needs to be done to ensure that there's overall compliance within the wider public sector? The other question that I want to pose, some reflections, is in relation with the County Assemblies Forum. I understand there was a directive that all county assemblies pass a motion on house allowances to MCAs. In view of this, what is probably the link between that and what SRC is doing? So there are a couple of questions that I wanted to pose so that my colleagues, as they come in, and reflections to ensure that this paper can be able to inform our salary structure in the country and ensure that going forward we have a sustainable wage bill.
Okay, I'm going to talk about I'm going to look at it from a different angle, and this is from a human resource point of view. And I want to say, as much as we talk about the public sector and how we can be able to control the allowances, I think my major concern is based on the recruitment and how was this particular person recruited to be a public service. And the other thing is that once you are recruited, was the recruitment done right? The point number 2 is that once you're recruited, did we have the job descriptions in place? Did we have the job specification for that particular position that you have been recruited to work for? And the other one is the time of replacement. When you are being put in the position, how was the transition from whatever you are doing previously and what you are doing currently? Once you are put into the position, the other thing that comes to be is that are we able to train and to develop you so that we can be able to grasp and get the skills that we were actually looking for? Now, basically, when we go back to the drawing board, each and every public sector area must be having its own vision and the mission and the values for that particular institution. So all what we are saying is that we need to go back and set the targets, because when we set the targets for each and every public service employee, it will be fair and it is going to be easier for the measure, and everything that gets measured, it gets done. We have not lost it all. We still have an opportunity to be able to set the culture. So from a HR point of view, we call upon reminder. We need to be reminded once and again, so that we can be able to go back again and be reminded why we are there and why we are working.
The members of county assemblies, the technical people, that is the clerks, always honor all circulars that come from the independent commissions, including the control of budget. And therefore, even after that motion was passed, there was no action that was taken. They complied with the circular that this will not be passed until we begin engagements. And I think that was a good way of handling that. This particular document, we should be able to build the capacities of the officers, the relevant officers, should be able to allow our county assemblies to legislate in order to pass laws, revenue laws that will actually work. As it is now, it's very low. Two, it will help also in enhancing their oversight as county assemblies, oversight on the performance of the revenue in each county government. But also, it will help us to understand what is the relationship between the on-source revenue and the fiscal autonomy of the counties, so that they can actually be able to step in whenever there are revenue gaps. Number two, for us is to look at who are these legitimate workers? Can we review our payroll? I think we are still using a very old payroll. Three, we have already begun introducing what we call the performance management systems in our county governments. It's already working. We are introducing this also in county assemblies. We hope this can enable us to measure the performance of the members, but also the executive.
I believe that we need to first get the labor unions in the House. Particularly as we are discussing, we need to have COTU and other subsidiary labor organizations. Then we may want to just talk about the assemblies, that's the legislature part of both levels of government and the judiciary. Then, by the end of it all, let's have one umbrella, institutionalized way of determining allowances, so that we are not having one institution coming in and saying we need this, and the other one saying we need that, and we don't get the right amount. We need to nail down the integrity of that data so that we can be able to say, as a country, what we are saying as allowances, they are really allowances. We may need to just shift them and have them narrowed down to just a few, or simply a percentage of the salary as SRC had recommended at one point, the 60-40. Thank you very much.
If you look at even national government, compensation to staff, even when you go to delivery of services, you also have other allowances inside there. So there are a lot of hidden costs. When we are looking at the budgets from National Treasury, even for MDAs, you would find development budgets, projects, implementation. There are a lot of allowances built into the development budget. So we will need slowly to unearth exactly what do we need to do to deal with this challenge of allowances. Much as we look at these allowances and we streamline them, we also need to look at their negative impact. For instance, today we can wake up and say, we are going to issue austerity measures and say, no more per diems, no retreats, no workshops, no travel. What does that mean to this economy? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Will KQ cross down the route of Mombasa? Or will Naivasha cross down I mean, these are things that we need to look at, because perhaps there are more implications than just what goes into your pocket. And I think this is a question I would want to leave with you. But the other thing, the last thing I want to say is that I think there are many guidelines and papers that have been out there. I think the biggest issue is about our implementation. And I think moving forward, we need to enforce this either through the budget process. We have to ask you the hard questions. If you are paying allowances that are not desirable, then we need to take them out. So thank you very much.